Imagine a small business owner in rural India, and she's desperately looking for funds to expand her modest textile shop. And she's been running this business, which has turned a profit for several years now. And the thing is, when she wants to go and expand her business, she finds herself kind of trapped in an endless cycle of tireless paperwork, too many branch visits, and rejections after rejections from traditional financial institutions like her local bank or the NBFC that's there. Her lack of access to formal credit, or rather, her lack of any formal credit history or any attractive collateral for her, makes her a not so good borrower in the eyes of these traditional banks. And as days turn into weeks, she feels opportunities slipping away, and she wonders if she'll ever be able to materialize a textile business that can actually reach every corner of India. This this scenario actually is what a lot, millions and millions of MSME borrowers face today in India's traditional lending landscape. And this really highlights the pressing need for some form of innovation in the entire providing access to credit, underwriting people who are new to the credit system, which is where this GFF, I think a lot of buzz was there around RBI's unveiling of the unified lending interface because of the essence of the problem that it aims to solve. And by leveraging technology and data, ULI, or the Unified Lending Interface, has huge potentials to kind of reach the masses and revolutionize lending in India, making it more inclusive, efficient, time efficient, and really being able to reach the underserved segments in India. And that is exactly what we shall be covering in today's community podcast of the FinTech Chronicler, which is being moderated by yours truly. And the way that I've structured it is I'll start off with a brief introduction of the lending landscape in India, some of the challenges that are there, the bureaucratic challenges, as well as a lot of the operational challenges also that are there in lending today, and why the need for something like a frictionless credit platform. By the way, ULI was not really ULI, it was not really an unveiling of a new product. It was actually a rebranding of a pilot project that RBI ran last year, which was known as Frictionless Credit. It's a platform that RBI, they ran an experiment last year on a platform known as Frictionless Credit, and now they've unveiled or relaunched it as ULI. So we'll understand the need for challenges that are there in our current lending ecosystem that kind of caused frictionless credit platform to be born. The core purposes that this solves for, from both the user's perspective as well as from the lender's perspective, the data parts that are available on the entire unified lending interface. And when we talk about this, we'll also, because data is something that it's very close to my heart, and talking about data security and data privacy is something that I always like. So we'll also kind of emphasize on some of the challenges that are there, specifically with respect to data protection, data privacy, and ensuring that this entire process of using ULI as a platform also keeps in mind security, because this is some of the data points that are there are very, very sensitive information. So how do we ensure that all of this is being kept in a secure fashion? But before we jump into the entire, the flow of the session, some basic house rules as always, which is at any point in time, because this is a community podcast, if you feel that, you have a different perspective, or maybe, you guys were also there at the GFF launch of ULI. So feel free to step in, raise your hand, come up on stage and add to the conversation, because as we talk to each other, that's when we all add to the community's collective learning. And that's exactly the aim of this particular podcast. So let's get started. First, with what I like to call the tale of two systems, the varied contrast, the dichotomy that exists in India's lending landscape. Because on one hand, we have the formal lending institutions, which in a way are the pillars of our economy. The banks and the NBFCs. Banks have been the backbone of India's financial system, and they cater to a wide spectrum of borrowers, from both individual retail borrowers who may or may not have like a very high caliber to repay, as well as large corporations, some of whom have been very good borrowers, while a lot of them have gone bust where banks needed to be bailed out by the government. But yes, that's not the conversation for today. That's a separate conversation. And on the other hand, where banks couldn't serve our customers, we had the non-banking financial companies come in with their very specialized sort of lending and niche products that they were targeting to their. That is one, the completely regulated entity. And on the other side, the dichotomy of the informal lending source, the money lenders, your friends and families. And because banks and NBFCs have failed to a large extent to provide credit to a lot of our population, Money lenders have typically gotten away by charging exorbitant amounts of interest rates and resorting to very unethical practices when it comes to recovering money. And of course, friends and families, I think all of us in our circle have at least one story of how, relationships were soured because of money. So that's the dichotomy of the Indian lending landscape and the challenges that exist because of such, disparate sort of systems existing. One, of course, is when it comes to banks and NBFCs, the bureaucracy around getting a loan. You simply have so much of paperwork and so many documents and all of that it becomes a very tedious and lengthy process in order to get a loan. Sometimes this can also act as a deterrent, especially for small businesses and individuals like, the lady that I was talking about at the introduction, where they need quick access to credit in order to scale their business or in order to satisfy their particular usage of the money. The next is there isn't, especially for a lot of MSMEs in I wouldn't even say rural, but even semi-urban area, where they lack access to formal credit because all of their transactions so far was on paper, was not digitized because they were all money based, cash based. So there wasn't really a trail for banks to underwrite them. The collaterals that they handled were also some things that probably perishable, so banks could not really use them to underwrite or use those as a security to give them a loan. And sometimes in rural locations, you have to travel as far as 20-40 kilometers in order to reach your nearest bank, which can also be a deterrent for banks and NBFCs to give you a loan over there. And that this kind of an exclusion, kind of perpetrates that entire cycle of poverty and in a way hinders economic development, economic empowerment, if I may say so. The fourth challenge that's there is with information asymmetry, because a lot of the times lenders do not have a very good understanding of the segments, new to credit segments of users in order to assess their credit worthiness accurately, which can, so there are two aspects to it, right? On one end, it can either lead to, even if they do grant those loans, it can result in very high, exorbitantly high interest rates, or on the other end, they're actually sieving out credit-worthy consumers by denying them a loan altogether. And the fifth aspect is a lot of these MSMEs and individual borrowers do not need that higher ticket size of a loan, which makes cost to serve, the operational cost of serving these small ticket loans, the manual underwriting process, the branch operations, the paperwork processing and all of those, because there's a lot of cost involved with it. Most banks, even if they feel that these consumers can repay the amount that they want to borrow, will reject it simply because it's so expensive for them operationally to make that loan happen. So this is kind of what was the need of the hour, which RBI also felt when they conceptualized the entire frictionless credit platform of theirs. And I think they had like four very solid principles on the basis of which they wanted the platform to work on. One was accessible, where they're expanding the range of consumers to which they can serve credit to. And the second was making it as efficient, time efficient as possible, with using technology so that the paperwork, which is the grunt of the time that's taken in a loan processing, that comes down. For example, when I was at the Global FinTech Fest and getting a demo of the ULI platform, some of the loans that had been disbursed under 6 minutes in semi-urban, almost rural areas. So that's amazing, especially coming from the pilot process. So efficiency is the second pillar. The third pillar that they had was on transparency, where the terms and conditions, and I think RBI has done a very good job of ensuring that whatever you're signing up, the key fact statement, it's in a simple to understand format. So you're actually fostering a lot of transparency in the loans terms and conditions, which in a way empowers the end users to make informed choices about what they're signing up for. And finally, affordable, because technology and the cost to serve is now going down, the operational costs are now going down. This can also potentially make credit a lot more affordable for the segments that have typically been underserved. So this is where I think ULI as a platform holds immense promise. By the way, just a quick two-liner on ULI. While a lot of people are comparing it to UPI is a platform as well as a service. ULI, on the other hand, is simply a platform alone. Now the architecture of ULI, and this is where we get into a slight bit of technicalities over here. So the architecture of ULI is that they're going to provide a platform that has the data, that has some of the rules engine configured in terms of the business rules engine and all of those, which any lender can plug and play to underwrite end consumers. So it's not really the service of giving a loan, but it's really just the platform for aggregating all of these different kind of data sets, and we'll get into the data sets in just a bit. But yes, it's just a platform that has some of the rules some of the rule engine, which by the way borrowers are free to not use. If they just want the data, they could just use that. But if they also want the rule engine, that is also a part of the platform. So it's not really the service, like UPI is a service as well as a platform. ULI simply aims to be a platform alone. Now, that brings us to the next point of our podcast, which is what are the data points that are available on this amazing transformative platform. So the infrastructure that ULI is based off of course, there is one, all of the credit information or the financial information that's needed to underwrite customers. So your bank statements, anything and everything that. So currently, I think there are, and I will have to go refresh my memory, but I think on the account aggregator ecosystem, there are close to about 20 different financial information types, and all of those are enabled on ULI as a platform as well. So when it comes to financial information, there's like a huge gamut of information over there available. Added on top of that, a lot of the government data that has been digitized so far, that will also be available. And for this, I did a little bit of a research to figure out, how much of this data is actually available. For example, land records. Now, according to the government's site, 49% of the villages in India, 49% of the land records, data from villages in India has already been digitized, which means half of India, half of Bharat, not just India, by the way, the land records has already been digitized. And this land record ownership structure, etc., will also be available on the ULI platform. That is one very interesting data point. On top of that, you also have satellite information. So with the satellite information, let's say, for example, that a borrower, a farmer goes to a bank and says, I want to buy XX amount of, fertilizers and seeds and whatever in order to grow my business. Now, using the land record data, superimposing, say, the last 3 years of satellite information about the crop patterns and the weather reports from that particular area, the banks can actually now predict how much, if we do give him these fertilizers, if we do give him these add-on, like he wants a tractor loan or whatever, what will be the improvement in his land's productivity. I think that one concept alone, that blew my mind away when I was listening to the demo at GFF. So yes, that's again another thing. Now, in the pilot project, by the way, for the frictionless platform, they had also incorporated another very interesting data point, which was from milk cooperatives. And this was the milk pouring data. So like if a milkman goes out with, say, five bottles of 5-liter milk into the villages, how much of that is he actually able to pour out, and then per liter the cost that he had to incur and the cost at which he sold it, that kind of gives the profit margin for the milk cooperatives or the milkman, in order for banks to be able to underwrite them. So that level of granular data, which I don't think has ever been available prior to this, they've managed to digitize all of this. And of course, they're coming up with a lot more interesting data points. So here I'm going to take like a quick example, or it is not really an example, but this is just like me hypothesizing a scenario of what all could kind of happen on ULI. So let's imagine that there is someone in a tier 2 city who wishes to, say, buy a bike for commuting to the city in order to work, for example. Now, the government can figure out what his chances of default I said government, but now the bank can figure out what his chances of default are by superimposing the satellite data, which can then map and tell the infrastructure development in and around his area to his place of work. At what pace has that been growing? Let's say that it's been growing at a very, very slow pace and it's been stalled every time. That means that his chance of default will probably be higher, because he's going to abandon his bike pretty soon, and then he's going to be like, why do I have to pay for an asset that I'm no longer using, right? That's kind of the mentality for a lot of non-credit savvy people. So yes, don't be shocked, guys. But with that amount of data, they can actually figure out whether or not they want to disburse a loan to a guy who wants a two-wheeler in XXX location. I think that is so super powerful, that everything can now be narrowed down to the smallest of pin codes in India. And of course, all of this is going to be, you don't really need a branch over there, or you don't really need someone to do a site visit over there for them to figure out if progress is being done at the right pace or not. On the other side, I also think for a lot of the large projects, especially where a syndicate loan is needed, there also I feel ULI can come in handy, because you'll get a steady stream of development milestones that were supposed to have been reached versus what has been reached, how much of the environment has been impacted because a lot of green taxes etc is coming in nowadays. So I think the potential for ULI is immense. Having said that, one thing that we do need to be cognizant of is with respect to the challenges that are there, because, and this is kind of towards the close of my whatever notes that I had on ULI, I think some of the biggest challenges when it comes to ULI, first and foremost, do we really think traditional banks and NBFCs today are ready to ingest such forms of alternate data in order to underwrite their customers? I really don't think so. I mean, a lot of banks and bankers are still, and my good friend Abhishek is down there in the audience, who's also a seasoned banker himself, and Dhaval as well, who's been in the financial services for a very long while. But I think they'll attest to the fact that even to date, bankers, despite having access to social media feeds, etc., are very wary about using any alternative data to underwrite their users. So that I think is one of the biggest challenge, where we're going to have to see bankers and NBFC and traditional finance professionals undergo their entire mindset change and figure out how to use these alternate data. Alternate data is great, but without you knowing what the patterns are that you need to look for, it's just a garbled mess for you then. So that's one big challenge. The second challenge is, because a lot of these data points is going to be consent driven, but the users who are signing up for this, are they technically savvy enough to know exactly what are they signing up for? And that brings me to the third challenge, which is, do they really realize how much of their privacy they're signing away just in order to get a loan? I mean, let's be honest, right? How many of us on this call today have gone through the details of the terms and conditions when we sign up for a new fintech app? I know I have started doing it. That's simply because I'm building a fintech app myself, so I'm trying to figure out and scope out what the other competitors are doing. But most of us just don't do it. And when we're saying that, so much of these information is going to be available with bankers and one centralized entity, are we ready to sign away all of our privacy just to get a loan? And are we aware that we're signing away our privacy? And I kind of touched upon the fourth challenge over here, which is, now because there's going to be an aggregation of all of these different data sources into one central digitized repository, are we confident enough that we have enough and more security measures put in place to make sure that this data cannot be hacked into, cannot be missold, cannot be accessed by entities who are not supposed to be looking into this? That's actually one of my biggest concerns. And that also kind of brings me into the privacy protection aspect of the end users. And while we have like a consent mechanism and all of that, and I quizzed a lot of people at GFF also on this, what about the revocation policies? No one seems to be talking about it. Like, okay, I signed up, I thought I wanted a loan from XYZ entity, but tomorrow it turns out their terms and conditions weren't that great. Can I ask them to delete all the data that they have on me? And can I be reasonably assured that yes, that data will be deleted at source and not be used anywhere else? We don't have that system in place right now. And the last concern that I have with ULI, let's say that everything goes perfectly, they've solved for all of the above 5 challenges that I spoke about, and this really scales off. Isn't the RBI already a little, or rather very skeptical of unsecured loans? And having said that, do we really, is the RBI really now telling banks that, okay, go ahead and scale up on unsecured loans? And what was their concern about all these days for, right? I feel a huge dichotomy over there. So yes, that's about all that I had on ULI.
Is this something an extension to Oaken, that is OCEL platform, which was brought in initially?
Excellent question. So this is also something that I've been thinking about, because Oaken was built by the think tank of India, which is iSpirit, and ULI is being built by RBI. There is kind of a competition over there. So Oaken kind of still provides access to a lot of the utility bill payments, your transactional data, and all of those. Whereas RBI's ULI is coming up with completely different set of data points. So there is some sort of a competition over there. Also, our Oaken in a way tries to completely unbundle all the different parts of the value chain that's there when it comes to giving a loan. So you have the loan origination, which is being unbundled over there, the loan underwriting, that's also unbundled over there, the collection process, again, all of it is kind of unbundled on Oaken. Whereas on ULI, what RBI is saying is, we'll just help you with the data and the business rule engine for underwriting on the basis of these kind of data. That's it. The rest of it is the onus of the lender who's there over there. So while they are kind of competing platforms in a way, I think each has its own merit as well.
Got it. And any visibility on which are the banks or NBFCs which has participated in this pilot project?
There was one that I saw during the demo, but now I'm growing old and I'm not able to remember which bank it was, but it was one of the PSUs. That much I can tell you.
Got it. And how do you see the impact on the existing fintech players like, Credit or peer-to-peer lending platforms which provide borrowings and all? And do you think this UPI line of credit, which was introduced in September 2023, will be integrated to this ULI platform? And how do you see that impact?
So, okay, I'm going to break this question down. And Ram, I'm so glad that you asked me this because it's making me also think on my feet. Coming to the first part, which was about whether fintech players are going to find this useful, I think right now, and this is just hypothesis, I strongly feel ULI is going to be extremely restricted only to banks and NBFCs, and that too, I don't think all banks and NBFCs. It's just going to be the top guns over there. So for fintech players, they're better off using Oken, number one, or even ONDC Financial for that matter. So that's one on the competition for banks aspect. Now coming to credit on UPI, I think what a lot of people are trying to do is to use credit on UPI as the tool to help monetize UPI. So will the demand for credit on UPI go down? No, I don't think so. I think there's still going to be a huge push to get more users buying credit via UPI because that's where the money can be made on UPI apps, on any UPI platform for that matter. That said, how will ULI mature in that space? I think right now UPI's penetration in a lot of these, let's say talukas and all of those, that's low. But let's say that it does reach like the 49%. I was stunned when I heard about 49% land records being digitized in villages. Let's say even UPI becomes that ubiquitous even in villages. Can ULI be used to underwrite on the fly? Absolutely. 6 minutes is actually a very low time to process. So maybe there will be pre-sanctioned or pre-qualified credit lines for users, which will be on the basis of ULI. Was I able to answer your question, or did I just add more questions to your mind, Ram?
No, I was still having a lot of questions which are coming in this answer.
I think that's the best part about collaborating with each other and kind of brainstorming like this. So that's kind of, and I'm also going to bring Krishna up on stage because yes, I would love to learn more from all of you as well. Hi, Krishna.
Yeah, hi. I just want to understand how far are we from ULI because these kind of announcements keep happening the moment they start working on it.
Yeah.
In reality, because I saw some write-ups also about ULI being very beneficial for MSME owners and things like that. There are already some ULI kind of things that are operating in the market, which are sanctions immediate 1 lakh loan, 50,000 rupees loan, 5 lakh loan kind of a thing. So they might be quite different, but let's say ULI from RBI, how far exactly are we? Do you have any insight into it?
Not really an insight, but what I was asking the people at GFF was, so the pilot for ULI that's been live for almost a year now, more than a year, little more than a year now. So on that, I was just asking them what is the ticket size range that they have, and they'd mentioned so there were only about 3 state-owned banks which were a part of ULI, by the way. But the ticket sizes that they sanctioned was very vast. On one side, they said that they'd even sanctioned as low as 16,000 for like a 3 months loan. And on the other side, they even sanctioned a 1 crore loan to some MSMEs. So definitely, I think, we are far from rolling it out to beyond 3 banks. But when they do, I think it can have a wide-reaching sort of a penetration over there because the range of the loan ticket sizes itself is so large.
When do you think these 3 banks will roll out? As the question.
I would really, I tried getting some more insights from RBI, but they were very cagey about that answer.
Yeah, because these things keep coming out. I just read up some things on the internet, and it's all a 1-day-old, 2-day-old news.
Yeah.
But no one is actually talking about the timeline as to when exactly it will be market available.
I don't think it's going to be market available anytime soon, simply because RBI governor has been so cautious about banks giving out so many unsecured loans, and ULI can be used for increasing that base of unsecured loans, right? So I think they're going to look at the economic conditions first, because you don't want a sudden run on the bank simply because they lent out way too much money and now depositors can't get their cash back. So I think they're going to look at economic factors before trying to roll it out. So I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I'm going to call Abhishek, my really good friend Abhishek, up on stage. Abhishek, it's always such a pleasure hearing from you. So, and while I know Abhishek very well, Abhishek, just do give us a brief introduction about yourself, and yes, would love to hear from you. Abhishek, you'll have to unmute yourself, which is at the bottom right corner of the screen. Yes. Hi,
Hello,
Abhishek.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go for it.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Abhishek and I'm a seasoned banker and 17 years experience. Currently, I'm looking into the approvals of foreign incorporated entities loans for borrowers outside India for my company, so offshore kind of loan. What I was just thinking on the examples given by you, say for the someone who's farmer and we have a data on the satellite data as well. But then I also think that when things go wrong, they go hugely wrong. I mean, in 1 year we see the tomato or onion prices going 50, and the next year it's 2 rupees. So even if if there is no weather issues, in fact weather is good and you have a bumper harvest, even then the farmer may not be just able to pay you.
Yeah, fair enough.
And on the other example, you said of the textile one, and if someone is selling on cash, I'm not really sure how can we have the data. Maybe purchase in on digital side, but if the sales is not on the digital end, then how exactly are we getting the data? And then the most important thing which came to my mind was why maybe based on the data available, we might just give the appropriate amount of loan. But what about collection by, and if it is operationally not really feasible, say you said a 16,000 loan. If someone has just given out a 16,000 loan to someone which is 80 kilometers away,
Yeah.
it just not makes sense if the payment is not coming through.
I think, Abhishek, in a way, you've indirectly answered Krishna's question of how far away is ULI from public adoption. Very far away, because these are challenges that has not yet been solved for.
Yeah, so I think quite a number of things need to be covered, and banks will just start it as a pilot only with small amount of capital putting in, and they'll see how it goes through, probably keeping it improving it over a period of time, and then whatever works, then maybe increasing the loan size on that front. Whatever not works, they'll simply weed it out.
Absolutely, absolutely. At this point in time, I think everything is a thought experiment. So yes, let's see how this experiment plays out.
Malika, I just had another thing, Krishna. It's not industry first, is it?
Yeah, no, fair enough. So I think a lot of other countries have also been playing with alternative data. And a lot of this data, so far, it's just been residing in different silos. So it's been hard to get it into one single place. But with RBI, because the government's push is there, I think they've been successful in getting access to a lot of these data.
Achha, okay. On an interesting part, probably my organization in Hong Kong or even in Singapore gives out loan based on the influencers who are actually promoting some of the data on Instagram.
Oh, wow. Oh, nice. Nice.
So these things keep coming, or someone who is selling on Tmall in China. So they keep getting the data from Tmall, how many people are visiting the shop of Tmall, the online shop,
Nice.
whether or not they are purchasing or not, and then how much purchase every week is there, how much can we fund the sales which is happening. So that kind of data is available and it is being funded. But even banks like
There are jammers everywhere, and you have to sign into the Geo network is because they want to see where all are we going, where all are all the attendees going, and on the basis of that, for the next upcoming conference, they probably sell their data and tell the stalls that this is a premium location, this is where you get a lot of footfall, etc., etc. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Everyone has access to these alternative data, and they keep using it to cross-sell, upsell to their prospective consumers. All right. With that, I would call it a wrap for today. We are a little over time, but I had such a fabulous discussion with all of you. And I'm so glad that I could learn from all of you as well. I hope all of you also were able to take away a lot from this session. And I honestly, to be very honest, I learned so much at GFF that I can't wait to figure out what to talk about next. So do DM me and let me know which is, product launch that you found interesting, and if by chance, if I manage to cover it in my notes, I will definitely love to host another session on the FinTech Chroniclers Community Podcast. Until then, I'll see you again. So take care and stay safe. Bye, everyone.